Ever since he learned the details of his wife Laura Letvis's death in Somerville Hospital and the numerous failures that led to it, Peter DeMarco has been fighting for new regulations to keep what happened to Laura from ever happening again. And now, statewide, changes are starting to go into effect to do just that. Laura died in September 2016 after walking to the hospital to get help for a severe asthma attack. She couldn't tell which entrance was for the hospital emergency department. The one she tried was locked, and her attack worsened too quickly for her to make it to a second door, which just had a small sign in the window identifying the ER. Laura then called 911, but by the time she was transferred to the right dispatcher, she could hardly speak. Hospital staff wouldn't find her until 10 minutes after she made the call, and by then she'd gone into cardiac arrest. 6 days later, Laura Levis, an otherwise healthy, active 34-year-old woman, died of hypoxic brain injury. Peter DeMarco learned of these failures 2 years later and began fighting for accountability and what's become known as Laura's Law, which passed in 2021. The law creates standards for lighting, signage, and other patient access and safety measures for hospitals across the state. Officials finalized regulations to enforce the law a few weeks back, and now hospitals have until the end of the year to comply. Peter DeMarco joins me now, along with Jan Cartman, a wayfinding consultant, architectural sociologist, and a partner at Cartman and Grant Associates. Thank you both so much for being here.
I really appreciate you having us on and sharing the word that people are going to be seeing changes at hospitals when they go to emergency departments, and those changes are going to be coming pretty soon.
Yeah, right. And can you tell us a little bit about, your experience is just so heartbreaking. You wrote about it so beautifully in the Globe magazine. And since then, you've become really an advocate for this issue, and it's something you've been fighting tirelessly for. What has your experience been like over the last several years trying to make this happen?
Yeah, a lot of work, a lot of ups and downs. After the Globe published Losing Laura, the story I wrote about Laura for the Globe magazine, a 10,000-word story that took up the entire magazine. This is Losing Laura.
It was incredible. I think we all remember this piece. At every it was unbelievable and so unbelievably heartbreaking, and also highlighted all of these problems that led to it. It wasn't just a tragedy; it was an avoidable tragedy.
It was avoidable in every single way. Laura had everything that could have gone wrong to go wrong for Laura that morning, from the moment she stepped foot on that hospital campus in Somerville. The signage was confusing. It was dark. There was no emergency sign above any door for her to have gone to. There was no one at the security desk to see her on surveillance camera. And the list goes on. I wrote the story, and I thought that would create change. That people would read this story, they would read about Laura's death, and everything would change. But after there was initial rush of publicity, and people were outraged, people were upset, but my phone wasn't ringing. So about 2 or 3 weeks after the story came out, and this is in November of 2018, I had to make a decision. It was clear to me that stories themselves don't change things, that people change things. And that's when I made this decision to try to become an advocate, to try to make sure that no one else ever died as she did. And from that, my local representatives, Senator Jalen of Somerville, Representative Barber of Somerville, amazing people. I walked into their office and they said, "What can we do for you? How can we help?" And that's when we filed Laura's Law. And that was more than 4 years ago. It's taken that long to get here.
Why? What took so long?
You know, part of the reason was that it took 2 years to pass the law during the height of the pandemic. Half of the law was passed during the height of the pandemic. Actually, one of the only bills to pass at the end of that session. So the legislative process takes 2 years. That was actually fast, people have told me. People who've fought for changes for years have said, "We can't believe you did this in one try." As we talked about, the law itself didn't actually direct hospitals to change anything. It ordered the Department of Public Health to create the nuts and bolts regulations. And so the regulatory process is a whole nother game. There's the legislative process to get your bill passed,
Yeah.
and then there's the regulatory process. So part of that was also delayed by COVID. We were actually in a state of emergency still when Laura's Law passed. So we were delayed there. And then the regulatory process is slow. It's methodical. You go step by step. There are hearings. There are public hearings. But that's all over now.
Yeah, it happened.
It happened. We're here. It was, you know, I've told a lot of people that who say, "Wow, you did all this, or you helped to do this," and I tell people that don't ever file a bill. Don't ever. It is so difficult. There's so much work. You don't understand what goes into it.
Yeah.
Don't ever file a bill unless you absolutely have to. And, you know, we're talking about Laura. We're talking about my wife, who I love so dearly, and who should be here today.
Yeah.
So of course I had to, and I had to stay with it, and I had a lot of help, and that's why we're here today. We finally have regulations as of April 3rd. Hospitals have all the regulations, all these nuts and bolts, directing them on what changes they need to make. And that's an incredible thing to say.
Dr. Karpman, what can we do? How can we make hospitals and hospital ERs easier to find in these moments of crisis where we need them right away?
Yeah, well, there are a bunch of things to do, some at a large scale and some at a small scale. At a large scale, where you locate an emergency department on a hospital campus makes a big difference. If you can see it as you drive up, it's much easier to find it. If it's located around the back or underneath a parking garage or around a corner, it's much harder. So the location, the planning of a site is one thing. And then there are signs that can make a difference, what we call signage now. Getting people into the campus, directing them to the emergency department, and continuing to direct them. We call those reinforcement signs as they go. So there's no place, we call it a decision point, where they have to make a decision where they don't have information about which way to go. They need either go straight, go right, go left. They need that information. And then they need to figure out where to park if they're parking. If they're walking, it's a different story. In any case, they need to get from parking or get on foot to the emergency entrance. The entrance itself needs to be lighted well enough at night, at dusk, during inclement weather, and of course during the day it needs to be legible. And there needs to be an identification sign, easily readable from a distance, with good contrast between the letters and the background that says very clearly emergency. And there are neighborhoods in which it may need to say it in Spanish also, or another language also. So those are some things that can be done. If there is a problem, if they lock the doors at night, it's very important to have an intercom, a two-way intercom, so a patient or a family member can speak with somebody from the emergency department to find out how to get in.
And Peter, those are the kinds of changes that hospitals are now required to make in order to meet the requirements of Laura's Law, right?
Those are exactly what these regulations are about. You know, all of those elements would have helped Laura that night. I think, but also I think all these elements, they sound basic, don't they?
Yeah.
To have the sign that's clear, to have a directional sign pointing in the right direction, to have someone at a security desk, or at least someone 24-hour surveillance of areas that patients can go to have a GPS point, address point for your emergency department if it's located on a different side of the building than the main hospital entrance, as happens a lot, as happened in Laura's case. The fire department went to a different address when they were called to respond to her 911 call, because that's the only address they had. There was no address for the emergency department. All these things sound simple, but there were no regulations for any of these things. There were no requirements. Hospitals have been left to make these decisions on their own. And for sure, some hospitals have done terrific jobs at this. But I think as Laura's story shows, and as we all know from personal experience, going to a hospital for the first time, they're confusing places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think possibly too many hospitals have forgotten to think about what their hospital looks like through a patient's eyes. That they think the patient experience starts the moment they hit the registration desk. And they forget that it doesn't. It starts the moment they step foot on their property, and especially when they're in crisis with minutes to spare, sometimes trying to find the right door to the emergency department.
You know, how you find your way during an emergency is different than how you find your way during, you know, a regular situation.
Do you have tips for people who find themselves in this position to get there as quickly as possible?
Well, one tip I would have is to think about it in advance when you're not in an emergency, to figure out what is the nearest emergency room to you, and would there be, if you're having chest pain, would you go to one place? If you're having an asthma attack, would you go to another place, for example? Because not all emergency departments treat all emergencies the same. So that would be one thing. Another would be to find out, would your insurance cover the cost of an ambulance? A lot of people don't take an ambulance when they need to because they're worried about the cost. And again, when you're not in that situation, just to find out what would the cost be so that I know it's covered. If I need to, I can take it. And if you end up walking or driving a car, it's important, I think, to try to find your way under regular conditions, not an emergency, so that you can see where things are, find your way, see this is where I park, this is where I go in. You put that in the back of your mind so that if an emergency comes to pass, you've got some familiarity with it.
Peter, in just the second we have left, can you tell me, after this journey that you've been on, what it feels like now to have this actually going into effect?
You know, it's difficult in ways, of course. This is Laura, this is her death. Talking about her death for 4 years as an advocate has not been easy. I think I'm glad that we're at this point. I'm learning to take people's congratulations, because we, and I say we got some real change made in Laura's name that's gonna help anyone having an asthma attack, a stroke, a heart attack, anyone who's rushing. You know, I've had on my my refrigerator since the day I started writing Laura's story. I've had a blueprint of Somerville Hospital's emergency department, which I found during my research, and I've had next to it a little purple sticker because purple was Laura's color, and I just wrote 3 words on that, and those words were, "Don't let up." And maybe now I can think about taking that down.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Peter DeMarco and Jen Karpman, thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.